Hello and welcome to Nature Connects. This is the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners from the Northeast and around the world. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Steve Kirk, the director of the Coastal Program in Massachusetts for the Nature Conservancy. The coast and our nearshore waters are complicated, busy, beautiful places. Today, I'm thrilled to facilitate a discussion that's near and dear to my heart: oyster farmers and habitat restoration. And to help move the discussion, I'm excited to welcome Dylan Krupa from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Dylan is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program Coordinator and has been working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service for over a year and also oversees conservation innovation grants, which you'll hear more about. Dylan has worked previously as a park ranger in central Massachusetts, managing dam systems for the Department of Defense. He's an avid birder and photographer of nature in his free time. TNC has been collaborating with the Natural Resources Conservation Service across the country for a long time. We're excited to hear about NRCS's broad workload and at the coast here in Massachusetts. And I'd like to thank Dylan and the whole NRCS team who have been committed and really proactive and creative in their investments in coastal conservation. We're also joined today by TNC and Massachusetts Solari Ocean Program Fellow Amanda Cutler. Amanda joined the Mass chapter as part of the Solari Fellowship Program. That program, which launched at the end of 2022, is designed to provide early career professionals from underrepresented communities with the opportunity to work in an environment that combines a deep dive into real-world conservation projects with a broad introduction to major conservation issues. Amanda is wrapping up her 2-year fellowship with us, and on a personal note, I'll be sad to see her go. She was a really important part of my team. Amanda grew up at the coast in Connecticut, and after her undergraduate work at Brown, she has worked in outdoor education and land stewardship before she joined TNC in our first ever cohort of the Solari Fellows. We'd like to mention that this fellowship program was created with generous funding from the estate of Nancy Solari. We'd like to take a moment to honor Ms. Solari for her generosity and commitment to developing future conservation leaders. We always appreciate the opportunity to thank individuals who have made arrangements to include the Nature Conservancy in their estate plans and work together to ensure gifts will be used in a way that will be most meaningful to you and most impactful toward TNC's conservation efforts. And the conservation effort in front of us today is at the coast. Many of the challenges at the water's edge and in the shallow ocean are caused by what we do on land. Development and land use practices lead to local issues like too many nutrients in the water that cause all sorts of negative impacts. How we collectively manage our stormwater and wastewater really matters to the health of our coastal waters. Climate change is a confounding problem layered on top of this. Big pulses of fresh water loaded with nutrients are becoming more common as the severity and frequency of storms increases. The coast is a popular place, popular for animals in and out of the water and in the air. Estuaries and their habitats like salt marsh, eelgrass, and shellfish are biodiversity hotspots and are the engines that drive ocean productivity. These habitats also provide direct benefits to people. For one, they can help protect us and our stuff like our houses, businesses, and roads from flooding. The coast is where we live, work, and play, and there are a lot of stressors putting the health and function of these places in jeopardy. While no solution or intervention can provide a silver bullet to solve the problem, today we'll talk about how NRCS is helping to turn oyster farmers into habitat restoration practitioners. As you'll hear, the Nature Conservancy and our partners at the Natural Resources Conservation Service are mission aligned on this innovative approach to coastal conservation. As you think of questions for Amanda and Dylan, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We're going to hear both presentations before we take your questions. Really grateful that you've joined us. Thanks so much for joining. And Amanda, take it away.
Alrighty, sorry, one moment here.
That looks great.
Thanks for that intro, Steve. So I'm Amanda Cutler with the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And today I'll be talking about how the Nature Conservancy and the Natural Resources Conservation Service are working with the aquaculture industry to rebuild coastal habitat. So one environmental problem that we're seeing on a global scale is a huge decline of shellfish populations. As you can see from this map, in many bays, more than 99% of oyster reefs have been lost and are functionally extinct, and the problem is especially severe in North America, Europe, and Australia. The loss of oyster reefs is associated with the loss of benefits that oysters provide to our coastal ecosystems. Oysters are extremely important to estuaries for the ecosystem services they provide, such as water quality improvement and habitat provision. Therefore, TNC has been active in oyster restoration efforts to increase oyster populations for the benefits they provide to people and nature. Healthy coastal habitats is among one of the top priorities for TNC in Massachusetts, and so oyster restoration has been a large focus of the coastal program here, and we have already permitted several oyster restoration sites over the past decade. But you'll see here that traditional oyster restoration is just one tool in the toolkit, and that aquaculture, when managed and sited well, actually provides similar benefits to people and nature, like improving water quality and providing habitat. Whether the oysters are on a reef or in aquaculture gear, they are still filtering water and contributing to marine ecosystems. And with aquaculture, there's also the added benefit of supporting livelihoods. Another benefit of aquaculture is that it is an extremely efficient means of producing food for a growing population in demand of more animal protein, especially compared to agriculture. Unsustainable agriculture practices have helped contribute to land and soil degradation. The UN estimates that 100 million hectares of healthy, productive land are degraded every year, which is roughly the equivalent of 4 football fields degraded every second. You'll see here from this diagram that finfish production requires fewer inputs and produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions than beef production, and shellfish aquaculture is considered the gold standard in using even fewer land and freshwater inputs than finfish farming. Not only is aquaculture environmentally beneficial, but culturally and economically, it's a key industry in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is widely known as a big seafood state. In fact, New Bedford, Massachusetts has been the highest grossing commercial fishing port in the entire nation for nearly 20 straight years. Year after year, the aquaculture industry generates millions of dollars for Massachusetts. In fact, the farm gate value for aquaculture is estimated to be around 30 million, which is the overall market value minus selling and transport costs. Aquaculture has one of the highest farm gate values for the state, after cranberries and dairy products, and is a leading contributor to the coastal economy. In addition, oysters are also consistently a top 3 seafood product. You can see in the figure on the right that the oyster industry is surpassed only by the sea scallop and lobster industries in Massachusetts. Because seafood is such a big industry in Massachusetts, oysters play a large role in contributing to meaningful year-round employment on the coast. There are somewhere in the vicinity of 400 permitted oyster farms in Massachusetts, from single operators to larger producers. These farms rely on healthy waters to be able to harvest shellfish and share similar interests in protecting oyster population growth for the future. Because aquaculture holds conservation, social, and economic value in Massachusetts, and the industry depends on healthy estuaries, we've developed several projects at the intersection of aquaculture and shellfish restoration to advance our interests in restoring oysters to ecosystems and supporting the blue economy. Many of you are already familiar with the SOAR project for supporting oyster aquaculture and restoration. This program came out of a partnership between TNC and Pew Charitable Trust during the pandemic when there was no longer a market for oysters. We purchased oysters from growers and then planted them on already permitted restoration sites to help build back oyster reefs. This program was a large success in Massachusetts and showed promise for future investment in the expansion of a restoration market. 10 farms were supported and about 460,000 oysters were purchased. Many growers expressed enthusiasm for having an alternate revenue stream for their product, and we were funded a second round to continue this work. However, this program was limited to restoration sites that were already permitted in Massachusetts. So to increase the scale of this work in Massachusetts and the number of growers that could participate, TNC applied for a Conservation Innovation Grant through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, also known as NRCS. NRCS is under USDA and supports primary producers for practices that benefit the environment. Dylan Krupa, the next speaker, will talk more about their mission and various programs. With the Conservation Innovation Grant from NRCS, TNC has been carrying on the momentum from SOAR and working with the aquaculture industry and local partners, including town shellfish constables, to permit more restoration sites. The process of identifying a new site is a highly collaborative and involved undertaking because of how Massachusetts waters are governed and the fact that there are many stakeholder groups that live, work, or recreate along the coast. The coastal team here in Massachusetts had to do a lot of boots on the ground, or really boots in the water, legwork to figure out the right location for this type of project, including where it was desirable in the community and where there were the right environmental conditions. After many site visits and meetings with different towns all along the coast of Massachusetts, we selected a site in Mashpee in Hamblin Pond. This site is currently in the process of being permitted with the hope that it will build interest in additional sites. We think that this model of incorporating stakeholder engagement into site selection will be important moving forward for scaling statewide oyster restoration efforts. Our goal is that by building out this practice, we can work with NRCS in Massachusetts at the scale that NRCS works with the aquaculture industry in some other states. NRCS has already been active in supporting the aquaculture industry in the Northeast, especially in nearby Rhode Island, through the EQIP program, which stands for Environmental Qualities and Incentives Program. Our Conservation Innovation Grant is just one small slice of EQIP. The way EQIP works is by compensating growers for using best environmental practices while growing oysters. As you can see here, there are many steps in the aquaculture process from when the seed is bought at a hatchery to when it's grown out and then delivered to market. Oysters can also be grown in many different ways, for instance, in cages or in bags. What NRCS does in Rhode Island and what they're starting to do in Massachusetts is reimburse growers who show evidence of implementing these best practices at each step along the way, such as drying gear ashore and protecting against biofouling. We're also collaborating with NRCS more broadly to think about how to connect shellfish restoration to other types of coastal conservation efforts in Massachusetts, including eelgrass and salt marsh restoration. TNC in Massachusetts applied for another NRCS grant and was recently awarded that to integrate restoration of critical coastal habitats into one comprehensive statewide plan, including increasing capacity at the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries level for this type of work and re-examining policies related to this as well. Overall, TNC has been grateful for NRCS's support in building out programs on the coast to benefit people and nature, and we're excited to grow existing projects and start new ones where our conservation interests and values align. And now I'll pass it off to Dylan, who works with NRCS, to talk more about their work and organization.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm Dylan Krupa, and today I'll be talking a bit about the history of NRCS and some of our programs. NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, is a federal organization that helps support farmers by promoting healthy farming practices on their land. NRCS was founded in 1935, originally as the Soil Conservation Service, and after a few decades of growth, became its current organization, NRCS. NRCS was created as a response to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. The Dust Bowl swept millions of tons of prime farming soils out into the Atlantic Ocean and created a time of hardship for the American people. The Secretary of Agriculture created the Soil Conservation Service and assigned Hugh Hammond Bennett as its chief. Over the years, the Soil Conservation Service started to oversee flood control plans and forestry plans. These additional responsibilities created the foundation for NRCS's work on more than just farmland, which we see today. The mission of NRCS is to promote healthy land management practices across the United States to protect natural resources like water, soil, forests, and more. NRCS works not only to benefit environmental outcomes, but to also benefit communities of all types. Our motto is helping people help the land. And in order to do that, NRCS has created a variety of programs. Programs NRCS provides are our Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, the program I oversee, Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and Conservation Innovation Grants, or CIG, and we'll talk about those later. These programs have some aspect of land management to them, where NRCS provides funding to participants who complete practices that are up to NRCS standards on their own land. NRCS has around 120 different practices, each with their own individual scenarios to choose from. Think of scenarios like how you would order your latte. It's still a latte, but maybe you want oat milk or vanilla or decaf. The scenario is the same thing, just a specific way to do a practice. The practices NRCS offers range from implementing cover crops on fields to promote healthy soils and reduce soil loss, brush management of forest stands to improve wildlife habitat and specific tree stand development, plus more mechanical practices like irrigation systems to help reduce water use and prevent nutrient runoff, or even things like fencing to keep grazing animals in or out of certain sections of your farm to reduce soil compaction. What I'm trying to say is we cover a lot of different types of practices and we're still adopting new ones. NRCS provides work on 8+ different land types. These land types include cropland, forest, pasture, range, water, farmsteads, developed land, and other. As Amanda has shown us, the work we do in the water category is very important to NRCS Massachusetts. NRCS and partners are able to implement aquaculture practices to help boost some of Massachusetts' prime economic resources. Practices that fall under aquaculture are bivalve aquaculture gear and bifouling control, restoration of rare or declining natural communities, and access control. Through the variety of these land types, NRCS is able to work with partners on a multitude of projects to have a more holistic approach at conservation. Two of our other programs involve easements. Our easement programs are agricultural land easements and wetland reserve easements. An easement is when landowners sell the rights of development to an organization. It can be NRCS, or it can be someone like a land trust or another governmental organization that has the authority to hold deeds. Having an easement removes the threat of converting farmland or wetlands into developed land. Agricultural land easements allow landowners to continue farming on their land, where wetland reserve easements only allow practices that will benefit the nature that is currently there or may convert back land into its historically wetland form. NRCS works with other organizations to create partnerships. These organizations are both governmental and non-governmental in nature, and they help NRCS reach areas that we could not reach on our own. NRCS's most common partnerships are with nonprofits, land trusts, state organizations, and colleges. NRCS and TNC have multiple projects across the US, and our partnership with Massachusetts TNC is in the form of their Conservation Innovation Grant, with work being done on the coast to promote shellfish restoration. TNC's project is 3 years long, and through their reporting and documentation of their work, NRCS may be able to adopt new standards and practices into our other programs. This allows NRCS the ability to continually grow and keep up with current environmental demands, thanks to the ideas and hard work of our partners, like TNC. So what exactly is a CIG? Conservation Innovation Grants are proposed ideas from applicants that have environmental questions they want to be answered. These questions may develop new tools and standards, but in the grand scheme of things, they are looking to explore ways to further our understanding of conservation. In my opinion, the I in CIG, innovation, is the part of conservation innovation grants that should be bolded and underlined. We're looking for ideas that push the envelope of conservation with our CIGs. There are two types of CIGs available to apply to. State CIGs encompass the state you are applying in, and the application is ranked and chosen from that state's pool of applications. State CIGs also have specific conservation priorities that your application must fall under in order to qualify for an award. National CIGs can encompass larger areas like regional or nationwide and are ranked against all other national CIG applications. There are monetary requirements to partake in a CIG. Yes, I know, it has the word grant in it, but that doesn't mean we're fronting the entire cost of the project. Applicants must offer 50% of the total project cost through either cash or in-kind contributions. Contributions may be services, materials, equipment, or third-party in-kind contributions. And applicants with unrecovered indirect costs may also use those to meet the 50% cost share total. Brief history on CIGs. They started in 2004 with the 2002 Farm Bill, and over the past 22 years have funded $286.7 million worth of projects. That equals to roughly $20 million a year. And in these 20 years, NRCS has awarded 711 grants to partners. That is a lot of questions people wanted answers to. Massachusetts NRCS has overseen 10 CIGs in the last 10 years, and some of the topics have included soil health, cranberry bog microclimates, forest management, and urban agriculture, just to name a few. So who is eligible to apply? To make this short and sweet, pretty much any person, place, or thing, as long as you are in the United States or any of its territories. If you're looking to apply, then keep an eye out on the NRCS website or the grants.gov website for a notice of funding. Notices go out usually once a year around the springtime, and each notice will have the general topics that applications should fall under. The notice will have instructions on how to apply and what is needed in an application. Once an application is ready, you can submit them through grants.gov and email them to nrcscig@wgc.usda.gov. You can also sign up at farmers.gov to receive e-blasts and news releases to your email. If you have any questions about CIG or RCPP that don't get answered today, then please feel free to contact me through my email at dylan.krupa@usda.gov. In our non-discrimination statement, USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.
All right, Amanda and Dylan, thanks so much for the presentations. Really great to get a sort of lay of the land. Maybe not surprisingly, as we've had our history at TNC as a land protection organization. Dylan, a question for you, reference to easements. There's a question about easements and does it mean like giving up your land? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So no, an easement doesn't mean giving up your land. It is selling the rights to develop your land, and you can still maintain your land with an easement. You can even sell it, but an easement is in perpetuity or forever. So whoever you sell your land to will have to follow the rules and regulations of those easement conditions.
Yeah, thanks for that. And then there's a question about the grants and the funding, I think related to your comment about matching funds. Can you speak to that a little bit, like how grants are not fully funded by NRCS? What does that mean?
Yeah, so NRCS wants to have the best work that we can possibly have through our partnerships. And so by requiring a 50% match, we're making sure that there's an incentive to do the best work that there is. And it's also a way to know that our applicants that are coming in are going to get money for conservation, one of NRCS's main goals.
Great, thanks. There's a another question here actually going to Dylan. Oh shoot, I've just lost it. Hang on one second. How long has NRCS been working to support the aquaculture industry in Massachusetts?
So aquaculture is actually a fairly new practice for us in Massachusetts. Through NRCS, this is our first year after creating some practices, one of them being restoration of rare or declining natural communities, and we're hoping to start contracting with that practice.
Yeah, I know that NRCS has been supporting the industry through a number of other practices for many years, but this is sort of a new opportunity for oyster farmers to participate in, which is great. Here's a question that is coming in. It's interesting. Are NRCS aquaculture practices and partnerships being used in the Gulf? And I wonder if that is referencing the Gulf of Mexico. If not, why? How can we replicate this work in other states? Dylan, I'll let you take that one as well, and I might have a comment as well.
I can only assume that they are being used in the Gulf as well. I only know Massachusetts workings at the moment. But yeah, so states can adopt other practices that they see fit through other states. It goes through a national review and then they get sent out, and a state can adopt whatever practice they deem fit for their state.
Yeah, that's right in line with my understanding of it as well. And I think that there's a lot of latitude as the state offices can tailor their funding streams to what is sort of most needed from their farming constituency. And so TNC has been working in other states and working with NRCS in other states. We even are planning to try to work with NRCS in Puerto Rico through our global aquaculture team, which is an exciting new development. Here's a question that might go to Amanda. What parameters are considered in selecting ideal sites for oyster reef restoration? And has the Hamblin Pond Soar Oyster Project been successful thus far?
Yeah, that's a great question. A number of different factors go into the site selection. In terms of environmental conditions, we look at bottom hardness, sediment type, salinity and freshwater influence. We also consider public outreach value of these projects. We consider where towns are interested in this type of work, where we'd be able to have a number of growers participate in connecting water body. These are all just some of the factors that go into it. It's a very involved process. And we're currently in the process of permitting our site, so it's not fully implemented, constructed, up and running yet, but we're working to get there and really excited about being able to work with the aquaculture industry with that site.
Yeah, Amanda is spot on there. There are like the ecological considerations for where a project will be successful. And then there are this whole host of social aspects of, where a community may be interested in participating in this type of activity and other sort of user conflict things. So it's pretty involved. Here's another sort of oyster related question. When working with organizations that are stocking oysters, are there targeted descendant populations or typically used for areas regarding one with generational resilience to MSX and dermo? And so to interpret that question a little bit, this is a question about sort of where you get the oysters from, and are there any potential ways to guard against the prevalence of shellfish diseases, which can cause oysters to die young before reproducing. Amanda, would you like to take a stab or?
Sure, I can do a first pass on that and say that we work really closely with DMF, and we definitely consider public health in citing these projects and also in what their management will look like. That's a conversation that comes up as a concern with growers. But the goal of the project is mostly for restoration and not necessarily harvest, although it's up to the town management to decide that. Although, Steve, would you like to add anything else to the specifics of that question.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And I think all I would add is that we're generally sourcing oysters for these projects that are ultimately born out in a hatchery setting, and those hatcheries generally are designed to provide oysters to the aquaculture industry. And so there's a lot of genetics and selection work that needs to be done that I think is sort of underinvested in sourcing oysters that would be really sort of best suited for restoration activities. That's a good question. So here comes another question about NRCS. How is NRCS funded? What should we be looking for in reaching out to our congressperson to keep your funding? Is it always wrapped into the Farm Bill? Dylan, you want to help us understand the origin story of NRCS funding?
Yeah, so NRCS funding is usually wrapped around the Farm Bill. We do get some incentives that use IRA funding as well. So if you want to have more funding come into NRCS, try to get Congress to keep IRA funding in NRCS pools.
Thanks. Here's an interesting question about, okay, here we go. I'm really interested in working in sustainable aquaculture and ocean systems. What recommendations do you have for young people wanting to work in this space? What types of organizations, career paths, skills does the industry need? Amanda, you want to take a stab there, and then maybe I'll layer on?
Sure. So my foray into this type of work was through the Solari Fellowship, but through involvement with different partners and through going to different conferences, I've seen that there's been a huge push for outreach and getting more young people involved in this type of work. I believe Sea Grant has a lot of programs, educational programs for people who are interested in sustainable aquaculture. And then, yeah, Steve, do you have anything else to add?
I was going to mention the Sea Grant programming. There is a general recognition that workforce development is a really sort of critical bottleneck in the aquaculture industry writ large. And I know that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and their Office of Aquaculture is really interested to invest in developing a functional workforce for expanded aquaculture in the U.S. Having been a former oyster farmer myself, what it takes to work on a farm is often a strong back, a strong mind to think forward of what needs to happen. I mean, this is farming, and so there are a lot of aspects, whether it's being able to drive a small boat or work around the tide, or to be thoughtful about, marketing and distribution of your product. There are some great resources on the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association website. There's also a Massachusetts Aquaculture Association, which you could look into. It's a really interesting space. Okay, we're going to move on. Dylan, what about state-recognized tribes? Are they eligible for USDA grants?
Yes, they are. And you will usually see in the notice of funding, oftentimes state-recognized tribes will have their match lowered or even removed fully. So keep an eye out on that.
Here's an interesting question. How do oyster reefs form on reef balls or other erosion prevention structures? And so I might sort of chime in if that's okay. So this reference to reef balls, that's actually like, I think, a trademarked company, but in essence, they're using concrete-like structures that are sometimes very small, sometimes quite large, like bigger than a person. And they're arranged at the shoreline in an effort to slow wave activity, and with the purpose of protecting the shoreline and slowing erosion. And so there's a lot of interest because if you think about what coral reefs do around islands, in that there's sort of like a lagoon behind the coral reef, and the waves, you know, stack up and then go over the reef, and it's much more calm and placid on the inside of the reef. Oyster reefs are in many ways sort of the analogy to a coral reef in our area, in temperate areas. And so oyster reefs can slow wave energy and can, you know, help to slow erosion. And that's a really interesting component, especially as we're seeing sea level rise, big storms, and erosion increasing. And so the question here is about how do oyster reefs form on reef balls? And really what happens is, depending on where you are in the world, the life cycle of oysters is such that oysters are sort of larval in state until they settle on something. And so if there are enough oysters in an area to then spawn and then have that larvae land on, you know, something hard like an oyster reef, it sort of becomes self-sustaining. If you put nearly anything hard in the water and there's oyster larvae there, it will settle on top of that. And so in this case, there are places where you can put these reef balls or these structures in the near shore, and the oysters will settle right on top of them, which is sort of bringing some biology to an erosion control strategy, which is pretty interesting. Let's see here. Here's a question, mentioned working in Puerto Rico. Is there a discussion about working in Florida to restore aquaculture there, specifically to help manatees who are struggling to seagrass die off and degradation of water there? This is, I'm not super familiar with what's going on, particularly in Florida. There's quite a bit. There's quite a bit of restoration looking to take place in Florida. So I'm not sure of NRCS's presence there, but yeah, thanks for the question. Okay, here comes another. The town of Falmouth has a fairly well-established oyster repopulation program. Has Amanda's Mashpee group interacted with them? Amanda, you want to talk a little about either sort of like what Mashpee has going on in terms of other shellfish-related programming?
Yeah, so I'll also say that the site that we selected in Hamblin Pond is sort of right on the border with Falmouth as well, Mashpee Falmouth border. So there's been some involvement there in terms of seeing if any Falmouth growers would be eligible to participate in this site. If I'm understanding the second part of that question correctly, we've been interacting with a number of towns in Massachusetts and trying to learn from other programs that exist as well, and see if there are any opportunities there for collaboration. And so we have interacted with them, and right now we're mostly interacting with the town of Mashpee because that's where the site will be permitted. But certainly we're always interested in hearing about other successful oyster restoration projects.
Yeah, this sort of points out a really interesting component of all of this work, which is that the structure of management in Massachusetts is actually fairly unique in the country, in that our towns have sort of the ultimate control over their natural resource management. And so for any of this work to take place, the local government really has to weigh in and be an active participant. And both towns of Falmouth and Mashpee and many others are really invested in this type of work. Here's a great question. If the threats of oyster habitat in the water emanate from the land, like failing septic systems, nutrient runoff, what steps are being taken to mitigate land-based threats? I'll let either of you guys respond to some of that, and maybe I'll layer on again too.
I can start and just say that TNC does work from land all the way to the coast, and we're really interested in the connectivity between them. The way that effects on land can then affect the water. We have a really great coastal team. We have a really great salty side, really great land side, and try to find ways to collaborate amongst all those groups. Do you have anything to add, Dylan?
NRCS also works on multiple land types, and so we try to reduce as much runoff from agriculture as possible, which can be a big threat. And the tough part about that is that it's kind of all-encompassing because you get it from like cities, from agriculture, from streets, and so we work on the part that we can specifically work on, but it is a bigger picture.
Yeah, I think this is like a really important component of our work. It's like, yes, I was referencing that the challenges, in the water really do stem from what's happening on land. And we have here at TNC, but there is a whole network of state agencies, other NGOs, the public at large that are working on trying to untangle this really tangled issue. And so it involves a lot of things, and sort of instead of going through them all, I think I'll sort of reiterate that there really isn't a one solution to these challenges. I think what we're trying to do is ensure that communities have as many possible interventions and tools that they can bring to bear to try to address the challenge. Is it true that oyster reefs cannot be restored in Massachusetts unless they are available for commercial harvest?
So my understanding is that with oyster restoration sites, they can be closed to harvest for up to a certain amount of time, I believe. It can be extended up to 5 years. But then there is some flexibility around how to navigate that in terms of for how long and how it's opened for harvest. Steve, could you speak more to that?
Sure. This is a great question, and gets to more of the intricacies of shellfish management in Massachusetts. I'll take an opportunity to just say that the majority of, or it's really in concert with the towns, the Division of Marine Fisheries in Massachusetts is responsible for the statewide management of shellfish, and they have been a critical and really proactive partner in much of our restoration work, all the while dealing with many challenges related to environmental challenges, management challenges. It's a hard job, and they're really becoming champions for this type of work, which is an amazing development. So while we're here with NRCS and their forward-thinking stance on restoration in Massachusetts, you sort of can't leave out the managers and now the proactive restoration skill that the Division of Marine Fisheries brings to the table. So for the harvest question, there are, because shellfish are managed primarily as a fishery, that's sort of like where the legacy of that management comes from, as opposed to the recognition of their ecosystem service delivery sort of powerhouse nature. And so it is not I expect that in the near future, you know, there'll be a lot of discussion around the harvest on restoration sites and whether that should or should not be allowed. It's a sort of sticky issue, and you know, ultimately those decisions are made by the town and the state. And you know, we're hopeful that our restoration projects are not viewed as only fishery enhancement projects, but also as ecological habitat restoration projects. And we also have to recognize sort of the culture and history of where that management has come from. Here's another question. Can individuals buy reef balls, and about how much do they cost? Can artificial reefs for oysters live in purely salt water, like off an ocean beach? In Maryland, there are nonprofits that create ocean reefs that can be donated to. I might respond here as well and just say that you might be able to go to the store and buy reef balls, but you are not allowed to go put them out into the ocean without the proper permitting. The permitting for this type of activity, like reef balls or things where you're trying to slow erosion, you're really not allowed to go put things in the ocean without extensive permitting. That's inclusive of these oyster reefs. We're putting natural material, we're putting live oysters, but the environmental protective laws that we have in Massachusetts and around the country have been really good at slowing and stopping bad development. And we really are, it is the right thing to do to ensure that projects are well designed, well thought out, and get the necessary permits to be properly cited and managed and monitored. So there's a lot that goes into these types of projects. And you're not allowed to just go to the store and throw concrete in the ocean without telling anybody. I see that we're getting somewhat close to the end of our time here. I think there are a couple of more. Hey, Amanda, here's a great question. Could you talk a little about your experience in the field as part of your fellowship program? Any key takeaways from the aquaculture industry? I would just be interested, you know, for the group to hear your experience with TNC and your fellowship, and then there's a, you know, an aquaculture related element to that.
Right. So through my fellowship, I've been involved in really all parts of this work, from some grant writing to writing contracts to being in meetings with stakeholders, to doing some monitoring of our sites for SOAR, and then working on the permitting for this current project in Mashpee. So it's been great to have that experience. And in terms of the second part of that question, any key takeaways from the aquaculture industry? I found that it's quite easy to connect with these people as long as you love oysters and you care about the coast. These people are incredibly passionate to work with, and it's amazing to see just how everyone's interests along the coast align in terms of wanting to protect the coast for the and oysters for the ecosystem services they provide, and being able to recreate, support the economy, and just have healthy, clean water. So it's been a great experience, and I've enjoyed all parts of it.
That's great. Here's a question. Can you explain the relationship or importance between salt marshes and the life cycle of the oyster? I might just chime in here, and then I think we might go to sort of our wrapping up. But you know, I would say broadly speaking, estuaries, these areas where freshwater and saltwater meet, the sort of shallow embayments right at the water's edge and the coast are highly important. They're valuable for us and for wildlife. The relationship between salt marsh and oysters and their life cycle is really that they make up the sort of critical elements of a functioning coastal system. They're like the really critical habitat types within our coastal zone. To not leave out seagrass in our area, eelgrass has been really challenged for, you know, close to 100 years. And, you know, there are ongoing efforts to try to restore all three of these habitat types. We're involved in a project that Amanda mentioned that Dylan and his team has helped to support through funding to really look statewide as to where we can and should be investing in habitat restoration across the whole coast. And, you know, our salt marshes, our eelgrass, our oyster reefs and shellfish species are the sort of backdrop to these really valuable places. And when bringing them all together, you see the whole picture. And I think we've sort of been forced into thinking about each of these habitat types on their own, particularly from a restoration standpoint. We're really excited and very grateful that others like NRCS are thinking about these systems as a whole. So I would like to see if Amanda and Dylan have any sort of parting thoughts or closing remarks.
Sure, I can go first. I'll just say that even though I've only been with TNC for the last 2 years, it's been incredible to see just how much progress we've made in this short time frame in advancing our mutual goals with NRCS. The team has been working with NRCS for a really long time to be able to contract with growers in Massachusetts. And we've finally made it to the implementation stage where we have a plan forward. We plan to act on it. So NRCS has definitely been a really committed partner, and it's going to be really exciting to see what our collaboration will look like with them in Massachusetts, and then what their collaboration will look like with other states for the aquaculture industry.
Yeah, and I'll say that NRCS's ability to do the work that it does relies heavily on its partnerships and the public. So if you feel like you have a project that could align with NRCS, then please reach out to us. We have field offices across the state, and you can go to our website at nrcs.usda.gov. So I hope you found our presentation intriguing, and thank you for listening in today.
Yeah, well, I'll personally thank Amanda in this venue. Really sad to see Amanda moving on from this position. It's been great to have Amanda on the team. Dylan, thanks so much for joining us today. You and the NRCS team across the board have been really great to work with. Thanks for participating now and for your leadership in this space. And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us. And thank you to those who support TNC so generously. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with a link to the recording. We appreciate your feedback, so take a moment to respond. I think we're going to have a poll for you to respond to on the screen here. And if you're enjoying our webinars, please be sure to share them with your friends and colleagues. You can follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram and keep up with our work. As always, you can register for future webinars at nature.org/MA-webinars. The next one is going to be on January 9th, and that will cover landmark climate and energy laws that were recently passed in Massachusetts. You can join us for the last installment in our series on offshore wind on January 23rd, where we'll be talking about community benefit agreements. You can learn more about that series and view the recordings at nature.org/offshore wind. We hope you can join us then. Thank you so much. Happy holidays and have a great afternoon.